port. Now let me see, I'm gonna look at my, okay, I'm gonna see if we're starting this. Let's see. Okay. Share. No, let's see, come on. Wait a second, sorry, I thought I had this all geared up. Slideshow from the beginning. Here we go. Show video panel. Okay, good. So we did get Dutton Goldfield. I'm sorry, my connection is a little slow today. So today we're going to be discussing port. Now, port is one of the world's great fortified wine. When we think about wine, there are three general categories. You know what? I'm going to try something. How do I get the people on the top of the screen?
If trying to remember here myself.
I thought there was something up here. One of my
At
students.
the top is view options.
Yeah, I can't see that. I can't see view options.
It's probably because you're
Actually-
sharing your screen. I don't think it works that way when you share your screen.
Okay, well, as a matter of fact, I'm going to stop share. Anyway, view
Yeah.
options. And what do I do, Dan?
Actually, I don't know if that is it. Now that I'm looking at it, I thought that for sure that's what it was, but now is it?
Go to view
Yes,
View.
I'm
and then hit speaker view.
But that, oh, okay. Does that work? But now I'm looking at
Yep.
Christine. Are you guys looking at me?
We all see you.
Okay, great. Not that that's important. Thank you, everybody, for your help. Because this way, you know, I can kind of see your expressions while I'm looking at the camera. So port is one of the great fortified wines of the world. When you're thinking about wine, there are three main categories. Table wine, which is generally considered 7% to 14% alcohol. There's sparkling wine, which is wine with bubbles in it. And then there's fortified wine, which is generally considered to be wine 14 to 24% or more. Now, if you want to translate that into terms of proof, you double it. So in other words, a wine that's 14% to 24% alcohol. If you want to think about it in terms of proof, that's, 28 to, 48% alcohol or close to 50% alcohol. Okay, now other fortified wines that you might know about, Marsala is a fortified wine. Vermouth is a fortified wine that's it's got aromatics in it. But the great fortified wines are sherry, which is made in Spain, Madeira, which is made in a Portuguese island off of Africa, and port. Port is made in the Douro Valley outside of the city of Oporto in the country of Portugal. Now, we do have generic ports made in the United States, Cookin port. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about true Portuguese port. Okay. Now, those of you who have attended this class often know, you might say, well, what's the difference between port and other wines? And of course, if you've taken these classes, you know the answer. The difference is the grape, the soil, the climate, and the human culture. So let's look at those. Let's look at those. And here are the port grapes. Now, gee, Touriga Nacional, Touriga Francesca, Alvarinho, I don't even know how to say this one, Tinto Roriz, which is called Tempranillo, other parts of the world. I would put money on the table. I would put money on the table that nobody here has heard of any of these grapes. Would I win? Yeah. Nobody's heard of any of these grapes. But you know what?
I love Tempranillo.
Well, and this is a Tinto Roriz. You're absolutely right. And Renee, now there are some very fine, not Portuguese wines. I mean, not fortified wines coming out of the Douro, made from Tinto Roriz. So maybe that's something, and they're great values. One is called Quinto de Crasto, Crasto. Quinto, which means farm, de Crasto, Crasto, Quinto de Crasto. Now, you know how I'm always saying there's always something new in the wine business, always something new. Well, none of us have, you know, when I took my exam, of course, I had to know all these, but 3 days ago, you probably could have put a gun to my head and I wouldn't have been able to come up with any of these grapes. However, these grapes have now been planted in the Bordeaux region of France in experimental vineyards because of global warming. These grapes can withstand huge amounts of heat. And so the French government, after 2,000 years, has agreed to plant these grapes in Bordeaux. And they are just now starting to be released. So maybe in 20 years, you're going to see these grapes coming out of French vineyards. Okay. Look how deep and dark these grapes are. These grapes, now, Gemma, I maybe I've asked you this before. Do you sunburn?
I can tolerate pretty much of the sun. Yes.
Oh, you can.
Yeah.
All right. Deborah Bosco. Oh, Dan Monroe. Sunburn, right? These are now.
Yes.
You have skin like Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir sunburns. These grapes do not sunburn. Look how thick and dark these grapes are. These grapes survive in port because they can withstand a huge amount of heat and intense sunshine. Okay, so those are the grapes. And of course, they achieve enormous levels of ripeness. Okay, now let's look. Is my view blocking yours? Can you see this? Can you see the PowerPoints? Okay, let's picture where Portugal is. Okay, so here's Portugal, here's the world, here's Portugal. Now look at this. Here's a close-up of Portugal. Here's Vinho Verde. This is light, low alcohol, high acid. I call this adult lemonade. You know, knock it back in massive quantities. Gemma, I can see you've enjoyed some Vinho Verde in your time. I can see that.
We call it soda pop.
Yeah, so it's absolutely adult soda pop. You're absolutely. Look how close Vinho Verde, adult soda pop, is to wines that are going to be 14 and up alcohol. Look how close that is. And you might say, well, how does that happen? I'll tell you how it happens. Here it is again. Here's a Porto or Oporto. The port region, which is basically here, is in a rain, it's what's called a rain shadow. The weather coming off of this very, very cold ocean, it hits Vinho Verde, keeps the grapes light alcohol, high acid, but can't get over the mountains. And so Port region is relatively dry. They have about the same precipitation as Chicago, but it can get very, very hot. In the summer, degrees of 110 for weeks at a time are not unusual at all. So not really, really dry, but intensely hot, allowing the grapes to ripen, ripen, ripen. Okay, so that's like the climate and soil. I mean, look at all this rock. Okay, oh, I said, well, I moved ahead a little bit. Let's stop sharing. Okay, so we have a situation, almost all red grapes in an intensely hot climate, which is going to ripen the grapes, a lot of sugar, and mountainous regions. So the grapes are not getting a tremendous amount of water, so they're staying tiny and concentrated. By the way, the soil is primarily schist and granite. So wine has been made in port for 2,000 years. Fortified wine has been made in port for about the same time, because distillation, in fact, was invented in Spain and Portugal. That's where we first invented distillation. But nobody cared about it. Nobody cared about Portuguese wine until in 1667, port got a huge break. What happened was in France, remember, grape soil, climate, and culture. Now we're talking about culture. France boycotted English goods. And of course, what did England do? They boycotted the primary trade thing that they got from France, which was wine. England was France's biggest wine country. And so England boycotted French wine. Well, now where is England going to get their wine? It's too cold to grow their own grapes. They can't go to France anymore. They just got out of a war with Spain, and they were about to go back into a war with Spain in about 10 years. And so English tradesmen started to look around. Where are we going to find some wine? Well, they went to Portugal. The wines made along the coast, they didn't like them, but they went in to the Douro Valley and they started to taste this fortified wine. I should explain that fortified wine is wine that you add distilled spirit to. Just pour in the distilled spirit. It can be grain alcohol, it can be brandy, but at different points during the fermentation and different cultures, you add alcohol. And the British tradespeople, they weren't so interested in just the wine going to England. They wanted to buy wine that was going to last an ocean voyage to India, to China, to the West Indies, over to the colonies in the New World. Wanted wine that was going to be solid enough to withstand the heat and the vibration of ocean travel. And they knew that the alcohol in the port was going to make the wine sturdy enough to withstand the travel. Okay. So a few years later, they developed a treaty that made it a lot easier. A lot of British people went over to Portugal and established port houses. So on port labels, we're going to see British names. We're going to see Taylor Fladgate. We're going to see grams. We're going to see war, W-A-R-R-E, sandamin. Also, the terms on port are British terms because they were developed to satisfy British speaking people. Okay, now let's go back here. So here we have a picture. This is Villanova de Gaia. And the port would be made in the Douro and then sent on, you know, the Douro River up to this town called Villanova de Gaia. And you can see all the wonderful trading ships and the port butts that were being prepared to sail away to, you know, China. Who knows? China. Oh, here, one of the things that's still traditional in port is foot stomping. After the grapes are picked, they aren't put into big vats. They're put into these low tubs. And this is called a lagar. And still, the Portuguese foot stomp their grapes because they do not want to break the seeds or the stems. The seeds and the stems will give very bitter flavors to the port. And if
Mary, have you ever done grape stomping yourself?
I never have yet. Maybe someday, at least not that I can remember. Maybe someday on a wine trip after a little something, something I did, but to my recollection. Yeah. And this is, you know, this is still a traditional thing that goes on in port. So, you know, you stomp the grapes, you make the wine, and then the wine, you ferment the wine just like normal. When the wine reaches the proper level of sweetness, according to what house you're in, the fermentation, you add 30% distilled spirit, which brings the port up to, at that point, 17.5% alcohol. At that point, it's 17.5% alcohol. Now, sherry is different. Many people think that sherry is sweet. No, sherry is fermented dry and then distilled. And then if you want sweet sherry, you sweeten it back. But port, the fermentation is stopped. You know, the distilled spirit goes in, the yeast gets loaded, falls to the bottom of the fermenting vat, is siphoned away, and you are left with natural grape sugar. There's no sugar added. This is natural fructose from the grapes. Okay. Now we're going to talk about the terminology. This view thing is making me crazy. Okay. The first level.
Yeah, Mary, can you move that view thing a little, because it is.
All right, you
move
know
it
what?
like over to the side, maybe?
Yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the share. Well, if you guys, is that okay for it
That's
to be?
great. That's perfect.
Great. So the entry level of port is called ruby port. And remember, these are British terms because they were terms developed by the Brits. Ruby port is just what it sounds like. It's ruby in color. It must be aged 2 to 3 years. It can be aged in wood. It can be aged in cement. It could be aged in stainless steel. but it must be aged 2 or 3 years. And it has a lovely ruby color and it's relatively light. You're going to get flavors of berries. You're going to get flavors of cinnamon and nutmeg. It's relatively easy to drink. After you open it, if you put it in the refrigerator, it easily has 6 weeks, And if you get one of those gas things that I told you about, it'll last forever. Renee, this is one that it won't freeze because too much alcohol. So it won't freeze. But as I say, if you leave it standing up in your refrigerator and top it with that gas stuff I talked to you about, it'll last a year. This is a port you can have for cocktails if you want, over ice. It's just the entry-level port. You can cook with this port. It's just a nice, easy port to have sitting around. Oh, I should mention that these are called wood ports because at some point they go into wood. If just a little bit, at some point they go into a wooden barrel. The next level is called reserve or reserva. And what this level is the houses take their best rubies and blend them into reserve. This used to be called, until 2002, these were called vintage character. And your retailer might still think of them as vintage character, but it was too confusing and they kind of outlawed that term. Every house has a reserve. Again, when you take your master sommelier exam, you have to know the names. So Wars is Warrior. That's the only one I remember. Sandeman is Founder's Reserve. These are a little bit better and quite a bit more expensive. Okay, now we have a category called late. Oh, by the way, these are blended vintages. A port house may only bottle 30% of their production. So by law, they must leave 70% of their port to blend into future products. A late bottled vintage is a wine from one vintage, but it's been aged in wood 4 to 6 years, aged in wood, and then just before sale, it's put into the bottle. There's a benefit to this. They're quite a bit richer. These are not cocktail wines. These are going to be quite a bit richer. They're interesting. But if you're looking for a nice little cocktail, this is not it. They're very interesting wines. Now let me see. Yes, so these are all in varying degrees of berry, bittersweet chocolate, nutmeg, cinnamon, maybe some white and black pepper, all those beautiful flavors. Now we go to something completely different, tawny port. And tawny is so-called tawny because you see it's got a tawny color. It receives the tawny color because they are aged 10 years in wood. This one is aged on the average of 20 years in wood, 30 years in wood, and 40 years in wood. Can you imagine having a product that you put it aside and you're not going to be able to sell it for 40 years? So the prices vary. Clearly the prices go up, as the age goes up. I would not recommend if you buy the wine here, I would not recommend anything over 20 years because of storage, because of travel. Maybe if you go to port, you can buy a 40-year tawny right out of the cellar. But if you buy it here, first of all, you want to buy it from a reputable wine merchant. And I would say 10 years, 20 years at the most. Tawny has flavors of caramel and all those butterscotch and burned butter. So it's a completely different flavor profile. Now, tawny also will, if it's a 10-year or a 20-year, if you put it in your refrigerator and gas it, it will last. A 40-year won't last at all, but a 10 or a 20-year will last. Also, I would recommend, all of these come in half bottles, and I would probably recommend that you buy them in half bottles. Okay, so Ruby, Reserve, late bottled vintage, and we're going to be talking about, well, let's talk about food. We'll talk about food later. Okay. This is the port that everybody thinks about. Everybody thinks, and I think Asaf, you had or maybe somebody else had a question about, or maybe it was in my class, aging port. This is the port that everybody thinks is port, vintage port. But this is only 1% of Oporto's production. It's a very tiny percentage. These are wines all from one vintage. So for instance, 1985 was considered a great vintage. When you take your Master Sommelier exam, you have to be able to rattle off the port vintages and their character, because the houses do not bottle a vintage every year. Sadly, they're starting to bottle too many vintages. But when each house, so for instance, Taylor Fladgate in 1985 said, this is showing promise. We're going to declare a vintage. Then they take an example of the wine. They take that to the government, the government and the trade organization. The government and the trade organization taste it, analyze the production, and then they say, yes, you can declare this vintage, or no, you cannot declare this vintage. So it's very much controlled by the government. Now, here is an example. This wine, 1985, Taylor Fladgate. Here's a review: ripe blackberry, raspberry coulis, black olives, a certain minerality, fresh. My golly, can you imagine? Fresh, 1985, well defined, black cherry. Look at this delicious. And this sold in one of these bottles sold in July for only $65. I think that's a tremendous value to get a wine like this for only $65. That's my opinion. Vintage port does not age, it has no shelf life. So you open it, you probably have to, one of the little problems with vintage port, it's never been in a barrel. It goes right from the lagar into this bottle. And as it ages, the tannin molecules, that's found in the skins, those thick skins, the tannin molecules bind with each other and get so heavy, they precipitate out of the liquid. So vintage port has quite a lot of sediment, and it must be decanted. That's the benefit of late bottled vintage. Late bottled vintage has been in a barrel. They take the sediment out, so it doesn't have to be decanted. Vintage port has to be decanted, and it's really one of the great traditions of the sommelier to decant a beautiful bottle of port. But at home, it can be tricky. If anybody's planning on decanting any vintage port anytime soon, let me know and I'll walk you through it. Okay. Now let's talk about food. The classic pairing for all port, except for tawny, everything except for Pawnee, is Stilton cheese. And I've just got to tell you, one of the sublime experiences in life is to taste port and Stilton cheese. It's really hard to imagine how gorgeous this is. You've got sugar and spice makes everything nice. The sugar from the port and the salt from the cheese, they lock. Then the port still has a certain amount of acidity and all the alcohol. So the unctuousness of the cheese and the unctuousness of the port, it really, you won't forget it. I'll just tell you that you won't forget it. Now, sometimes you will see people pour port on top of the cheese. That's for tourists. Don't ever pour the port on top of the cheese. You want to serve, in smallish pours, probably 2 or 3 ounces at most, even with just plain Stilton and some grapes. You could have cherries, figs. A fig is very classic. Or maybe, I think don't these look like, or maybe these are pears. Isn't this a beautiful little tartlet with pears poached in port? I bet there's some blue cheese in there someplace. Here is a lovely thing. This is probably Stilton cranberries. Here you've got some walnuts, also classic. In my family, this is what Santa got. We left out for Santa and his reindeers, we left out port and Stilton, and we think that Santa liked it because it was gone by the time my sister and I woke up for Christmas morning. Okay, port and chocolate. Oh, Lordy. Not milk chocolate, and with red port, not white chocolate. So a bitter chocolate, a bittersweet chocolate. Here are these handy little cups that you can fill with port. Oh my God. Or here is just a nice, gorgeous looking piece of chocolate. Or what about this? Once again, a pear poached in port sitting on top of, maybe a little flourless chocolate cake. This looks like a little Stilton cheese right here. But just some port, some pieces of chocolate, a couple of figs, some grapes, some nuts. You got yourself a party. For tawny port, we want to think about roasted nuts. We want to think about caramel. I mean, this is what I would do. This is in fact coffee ice cream. Get yourself some coffee ice cream, put it in a cup, pour some tawny on top of it, put a couple of walnuts on it. You're a chef all of a sudden. Isn't this I don't even know what this is, but I can tell this would be Does anybody know what this thing is? Like just a pretty little sugar cake? Doesn't it look lovely? I don't know what it is, but it'd be good with tawny port. And then a lovely flan. Anything caramel, honey, butterscotch, burned butter, those kind. Oh my God, taffy apple. Wouldn't a taffy or an affy apple with some tawny port, wouldn't that be fantastic? Perfect. Okay, but port doesn't only have to be strictly for dessert, because there are all sorts of applications of port sauce. Of course, what you do is you'd use your ruby port for this. Any game bird that would have, you know, raspberries, cherries, cranberries. So this happens to be duck. You make a delicious port sauce. This is venison. I think these are some cherries or something, and you've got some blue cheese. Here's some wonderful, I guess this is a steak or something. And then here is some chicken. Now, believe it or not, I got an email from Food and Wine just a couple of days ago with a recipe for chicken in port sauce. And here it is. I think this is red port. I don't know, but these look like little apricots. So maybe it's tawny port. You'd have to look at your specific recipe. Now, as I say, we're not talking about cooking port. We're not talking, you know, God love the gallows, God bless them, but we're not talking about gallo port that's going to come in a jug. We're talking about Portuguese port. However, Australia and South Africa, you know, Great Britain's penal colonies, have started their own, you know, port industries, and especially Australia, one producer called Yalumba, Y-A-L-U, M as in Mary, B as in baby, A, Yalumba. And their brand name is Clock Tower. They make delicious tawny ports at a fraction of the cost of Portuguese ports. They're very, very highly reviewed. So if you want to not spend the money on a Portuguese port, although I think you should, the next best option is Yalumba from Australia. Let me see. Oh, I should mention that vintage port, it's put in the bottle. It's intended to age at least 10 years, more like 50 years. So this would be the kind of thing, if you want maybe a 50th wedding anniversary or a 50th birthday or something, you buy a bottle of port when it's released, put it in a cool place, you know, constant temperature. You're always going to keep it standing up because the alcohol will eat through the cork. You keep it standing up. And in 50 years, you've got yourself a gorgeous, beautiful, special aged port. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. This is Portuguese. I don't know how to say it, but as always, I'm going to wish you good wine and good health.
Fantastic. Does anyone have any questions about port or anything such as that for Mary? This was actually really great. There was a lot of things I didn't know about port that I just learned today. So it was fantastic.
Well, there's a whole, I mean, you know, this thing, with global warming, about 20 years ago, a very fine Bordeaux producer saw it coming, went to Portugal, applied Bordelaise techniques. His property is called P plus, P as in Pratt, plus S, Symington. They make wonderful dry wines, but he was able to be the conduit to bring these Portuguese grapes back to Bordeaux. Sorry, Christine, I'm just.
No, it's exciting to see like how these changes are coming and that the government's allowing these things to happen with such a regulated industry and everything. And it's that they're letting out the reins and they're creating this vast amount of creativity that's now sparking among people that have been doing the same thing over and over again. And I can only, imagine the amazing fruits of this labor that we're going to be seeing down the road.
Yes. Thank you. That was wonderfully put.
Yeah, it's great. So anyone, any questions on port? Okay, is port drunk more in the cooler months versus the warmer months?
Well, port is hot most of the time. So if you ask the port producers, they say they drink it all year round. But the port producers, you should see these guys. They're all huge. I don't know why, but they're huge people. In this country, port is definitely more consumed in the cooler. We're right now coming into port season. And so if you go to a wine merchant, you're gonna, maybe you're gonna start to see some sales on port. If it was another time, we'd be having a lot of port tastings. We'll do that again someday. But we are right now coming in, and the Charles Dickens Christmas Carol, the idea of the stuffed goose and all that kind of stuff. We are just now coming into port season. Thank you for that question.
Yep, that was Deb. So
Thank you, Deb.
anyone else? Yes, Renee.
Well, I have a question about the Tempranillo grapes. I've seen them in blends before, but my sister introduced me to a winemaker that she knows that experimentally just bottled just Tempranillo, and it was incredible. We finally drank our last bottle, and I'm sad about that. This is Oregon.
This is in Oregon.
In Oregon. So I'm wondering if Oregon, since this grape was obviously quite successful for one grower, I'm wondering if Oregon is heading into using some of those Portuguese grapes and methods.
Renee, you are absolutely correct. Oregon, they've made their fate with Pinot Noir. Noir is very expensive and Pinot Noir is very fickle. Some people that Tempranillo and Pinot Noir are related. Some people feel that the monks, that pilgrimage, that big long pilgrimage through Spain, many people feel that the monks from Burgundy went on the pilgrimage, the Compostola, I can't remember the name, the Compostola pilgrimage, and brought Tempranillo back. So people, I think it's been disproved now with DNA, but Tempranillo has a lot of the same character that Pinot Noir has, but it's not as fickle. And so you're absolutely right. I usually say, like Albarino, do not, get it only from Spain. But Tempranillo, I've tasted several very good examples. California's too hot. No Tempranillo from California, but Oregon, I agree with you, Renee. There are plenty of people experimenting with Tempranillo.
Then Chile and Argentina, two other countries you're gonna see Tempranillo from?
I haven't. I really haven't. That's a very interesting question. I haven't.
They have some of those cooler regions and stuff along the coast.
Well, it has something to do with the soil and the climate. You know, if I was an active sommelier, I'd be able to rattle off the answer. But sadly, next time I see somebody who might know, I'll try to ask that question. And I'm so glad, Renee, that you bring up Tempranillo. You know, Tempranillo is one of the great red grapes in the world, but because Spain was isolated under Franco for so many years, the modern wine industry developed without Tempranillo. And so we don't have a concept of what a wonder. It makes inexpensive wines, easy to drink, $10 wines. It makes very, very great wines that you can get at a tremendous value, $30, $35 for a great bottle of wine.
Awesome.
I will continue my pursuit of the.
You're supposed to.
All right, well, I think that's actually everything for today. Thank you all for joining us. We love these Wine Wednesdays. Mary and I need to just chit chat on some upcoming topics for us to cover and everything. And tomorrow we will have Thirsty Thursday. Excited to have people join us for that. I did receive the ingredients from John for tomorrow's cocktail. So if you haven't reached out yet, and I will be getting that out to people, but if you haven't reached out yet and you want tomorrow's ingredients for the Thirsty Thursday cocktail, just email taste@nl.edu and I will send that your way. And yes, Mary.
I forgot one thing. It's my birthday, and I couldn't be happier than to celebrate my birthday with all of my buddies.
Hey, oh my
Thank you for helping me.
Happy
Happy birthday.
birthday.
Hey.
You just snuck that right in at the end there, didn't you? Well, happy birthday, Mary. Anything
Thank
else you want to say to us before we all depart?
Just enjoy yourself.
Have a good glass of port for your birthday.
There you go.
Yep, two.
Maybe two.
Gemma.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe two. What
I
we
might
do.
do.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Good evening.
Bye-bye.